Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the show on this January 18th, 2023, a Wednesday. Thank you for tuning in. I'm glad to have you guys here. Now, I got a story for you guys today. And it comes from when I was a younger guy. And it's part of the evidence that I was presenting to you yesterday. I'm going someplace with this. And this might be the most important story that you guys have ever heard. It sounds like something very strange, but I believe it to be totally true. And if you continue watching this series, you're going to have an aha moment, and it's going to be a little bit shocking for you. But anyway, I'm going to continue on with the story here. So, this is the second part of the story, and it's evidence that I'm presenting to you guys. Now, you see this truck? This is called a well drilling rig. And it's got this weight that drops from that post down there, and it drives pipe into the ground. And the pipe goes down, and they add sections on, and they go deeper and deeper until they find water, and they pump the water out. And this is how they put in a well casing for water. Well, let me show you some pictures here. These are pictures of Florida. And, it's all like this white powdery sand, everywhere. If you've ever went to a place like Daytona Beach, Florida, a lot of people have visited Daytona Beach, and it's just this sand everywhere, like behind my head here. You see all that sand? So, when I was a kid, I used to get home from school, and I used to run out to the backyard and start digging in the sand, Sometimes I'd dig these pits and stuff that would be 6 feet deep or deeper. And I was only 8, 10 years old, but it's easy to dig in sand. You know how easy it is to dig in sand? And my mother would be worried. She'd be like, "Don't do that," she said, "or fill those in," because she said, a snake's gonna crawl in there with you, and you're gonna get bit one of these days. She was upset about it. She didn't like me doing that, but I was all into doing it anyway, But what I learned about Florida later in life is I knew this fella who used to dig wells for a living. He had one of those trucks, kind of like this truck here, and he used to go around, and this was when I was in my teenage years. And it wasn't only my place in Florida where the sand was. It was everywhere. Anywhere you wanted to go. You could drive 100 miles over here and still you'd hit nothing but sand. Drive 100 miles over there, nothing but sand. It's very easy digging. You want to dig a hole anywhere in Florida, anywhere you're at all, you can just use a normal shovel and dig down so easy, just like digging in soft ocean sand or beach sand. Oftentimes, the roads down there are just sand roads if they're not a paved road. Like if you're going in anywhere, you're going exploring anywhere off-road or anything in Florida, you hit sand roads. And they're totally different. The sand roads are totally different than gravel roads that you're used to in the north. Gravel roads and roads in normal soil, like up in the north, you've all been off-road before, off on a dirt road someplace before, especially up here in the north. And when those roads get dry, they get nice and hard, like in the summertime, and you can drive on them real easy. But in the wintertime, those roads in the north that are made of gravel and clay and things like that, they get mucky in the wintertime or in the springtime especially because of wetness and turns to muck. And those roads can be very difficult to travel on. Well, the sand roads in Florida are totally different. Just the exact opposite. When there's lots of rain, the sand compacts down really hard and it's easy to drive on. You'll never get stuck. But in the wintertime in Florida, they get droughts, or they get long periods with no rain. And during periods like that, if you're driving on these sandy roads, you'll get stuck really easy because it all just turns to powder. And that sand powder is the worst stuff to get stuck in, worse than mud even. Believe me, when I was a young guy, driving around Florida and stuff, living in Florida, that's the way it was. We used to get stuck really easy in the sand. Dry, hot, warm sand, your vehicle just sink to China. So, that being said, this fella that I used to know, He used to dig these wells all over Florida, and he used to drive this casing down into the ground rather deep. And he used to talk. We used to invite him over to dinner sometimes, and we'd have dinner at our house. My mother and father would be there, and he used to talk a lot, about his well digging exploits all over Florida, and one of the things that I know for a certainty, and I've seen some of the things he showed us that he found down there, which I'm going to get into in a few minutes, was one of the things is the sand anywhere you go is about 30 to 60 feet deep of nothing but sand. So if you're digging anywhere, when I was a kid, I was digging down 6-8 feet deep, and I hit nothing but sand. I've never seen a stone, ever. Just nothing but this white powdery sand that was easy to dig in, Well, it doesn't go forever. It goes down 30 to 60 feet deep, according to the fellow that used to dig the wells. Right? And then you start to hit rock. But it's not ordinary rock. It's a very white porous rock that's called limestone. And in fact, it's full of holes. It's like Swiss cheese, the rocks. They got holes all in through them everywhere. And in those holes, water. There's water. Well, it turns out that limestone rock that's down there is an ancient coral reef. Everywhere underneath Florida you go down there. Most of the whole state. Down underneath the layers of sand is an ancient coral reef that's been compressed with tons and tons and tons of sand sitting on top of it. And it's formed a water layer down there because it's very porous. And that water layer is called the Florida Aquifer. Tremendous amounts of fresh water exist down there because they've been filtered by all that ancient coral. So now, when he was digging into that ancient coral, things used to come up his well pipe casing because the water pressure would push things up his well pipe casing, and he'd collect them. Seashells, fossils, shark's teeth, all kinds of stuff. So he laid them out on the table, and he was showing us all this stuff that used to come up as well pipe casings. Sometimes I think he'd do casings that were quite big, like 3-inch casing. When he'd get down deep enough underneath all that big layer of sand. And especially shark's teeth. It was one of the primary things that would come up. So later on in life, I started swimming at the springs, this natural springs in Florida called Rock Springs. Now, this is when I was a teenager. And it's got a cave that goes all the way down into the aquifer. It's a small, narrow cave. And because the water down the aquifer is under pressure, down there 60 feet deep, it's a fissure in the earth that created this spring called Rock Springs. And all of this water comes pouring up out of the aquifer into this small little river that flows downstream into a larger river. And so I heard young fellas, went down the aquifer. I think somebody died, got trapped down there anyway on their way down to the aquifer. But anyway, they put bars up over top of the opening that led into the aquifer. It's like a cave with water pouring out of it. And so they put bars up so people couldn't get in there to get trapped any longer. And the pressure of the water coming up out of there was tremendous. The freshest water you ever seen in your life. But it also carried up debris from down deep underneath the ground into that river that would flow out into the larger river. And so I used to swim in there. I used to go there. It was a public swimming place. It was what they call a swimming hole. I don't think they charged at the time. This is a long time ago. They probably got some sort of a state park there now or something. Gosh only knows. I haven't been there in so many years. But I used to do what's called snorkeling. You got swim fins on, you got a snorkel on, you got a face mask. And I used to snorkel up and down the bottom there, and I used to find all kinds of shark's teeth. So I know And one day, I actually found a woolly mammoth tooth. I had it for years. It was a big woolly mammoth tooth that I found in there. I found teeth from like prehistoric animal. I'd find pieces of prehistoric animals and everything down in that cavernous river that come right up out of the ground in Florida, indicating that deep down underneath the ground down in Florida, everywhere you go, doesn't matter where you go, there's a sedimentary layer that's just full of prehistoric fossils. Now, where am I going with all this? This is more evidence. Because I'm going to put it to you exactly what I believe. I believe that the whole state, most of the whole state of Florida, is a sandbar that covered up a prehistoric coral reef. An enormous coral reef that was covered by a sandbar. A sandbar that's 30 to 60 feet deep, thick, of nothing but pure sand and silt. So where can you imagine the enormous amount to cover a whole state the size of Florida? The enormous amount of sand and silt. Where would it all come from? Well, it's obvious to me. It's runoff. It's runoff from some sort of a previous event that occurred that had so much water involved that it actually pushed all that enormous amount of sand and silt. It filtered it off of the whole continental United States, and it ran off down there in that direction, and it made a sandbar that's like 100 miles wide and is like 400 miles or 500 miles long. That's like 30 to 60 feet deep. An enormous sandbar. Probably the biggest sandbar in the world. Most people don't know about this. But what it actually covered up was all these coral reefs. It must have been just full of prehistoric animals too, because of the amount of debris. Anywhere you want to dig down there, things like shark's teeth and stuff will start coming up through the pipe. Just that small pipe that he was driving down in that well casing was bringing up anywhere he wanted to dig, would bringing up things like bones and prehistoric animal parts. And it's a treasure trove down there underneath the sand in Florida. It would be a treasure trove of prehistoric fossilized remains. So this is another piece in the puzzle. What sort of a geological event that could be Earth-wide? Because now we're looking at, now I've given you an example from Florida, but I've also given you an example from halfway around the world, down in down in the tropics down there, on the other side of the globe, yesterday, Easter Island. And so, can you imagine what we're looking at here is evidence, parts and pieces of an event that occurred probably during what they describe as the last ice age. But there's a lot more to come. Thank you guys for listening. Like and subscribe, and we're going to get to where I'm leading all this to. Something that could actually happen again. And no, we're not talking out 1,000 years from now. We're talking very soon. Catch you guys in the next show. Bye-bye.